for the pregame show. So this was a lovely surprise. Oh, hold on, it's all the way over here. I gotta say, this is a fantastic thing to discover. I was digging through a pile of books and I found this, which I've mentioned previously on the stream, and then I looked inside and I was like, what? Look at this. I've almost finished it. And for a book that you might come back around and rediscover, to find that there is something that you have almost finished that is of length, and realizing that in the amount of time that you might normally give, given attention span or priorities or whatever interrupts your flow, given the amount of time that you might give to how much of a book you can read in a single burst, there's enough here to finish. And that is a good feeling. So, that's good. It's going to get back into Toynbee. Probably my favorite early 20th century Western historian of civilizations. Other than that, general intake has been slow, so still on the diary of Chuji's travels, but having made some headway into it, able to watch it in like 30 to 45 minute bursts. I've got some really neat scenes here, in particular, ways that the setting is set up. So let me kind of move some things around here on my desktop so I can see my notes and also what I'm looking at. There we go. So yeah, Diary of Chuji's Travels. This is the title card, which those who are returning might recognize from last time. So yeah, so the first, sort of like the second major episode, takes place in a town that brews sake. That's kind of its main commerce. And so the setting that the director, Ito Daisuke, this Diary of Chuji's Travels is a 1927 black and white Japanese samurai movie. Indeed, as all samurai movies in the 1920s tended to be. Yeah, so he takes it takes place in a sake brewery town, and these large barrels, these large vats are apparently part of the process. I don't know anything about sake brewing, but this seems relevant. And he uses this sort of yard where these are set up to dry as a setting for a lot of different scenes. And as you can tell, there's a lot of possibilities for dynamism here in these shots. Here, for example, I mean, it's you get to see the rows of them, and there is a sort of dynamism as they kind of come toward the viewer and then veer off to the side, and the diagonals sort of arching in different directions, and that's all quite beautiful. And oh yeah, this is another one. This shot is held for, I want to say, about 5 to 10 seconds, and easily half of the screen, it's perfectly split right down the middle, is taken with the interior of a barrel sort of dominating the whole thing. And these guys in the background are participating in part of the sake brewing process. They're kind of tugging up and down to some ropes, which are churning a thing, and it's a little bit beyond me what they're doing exactly, but these are all apparati for brewing sake. And yeah, it's like this whole scene takes place with half the barrel dominating the visuals. It's like I kind of feel like Ito, like he kind of knew there was something really evocative and a lot of really dynamic potential with what he could do with these props, and just went wild and took advantage of it in all sorts of compositions. And it's really cool. It's really neat to see somebody doing something with an artifact like that is fueled by enthusiasm and a good eye, rather than necessarily justifying it more than they need to. I can't find what I detect from this use of the prop is mainly enthusiasm rather than too much thematic obsession. But he does use it to good effect, because a lot of times this sort of yard with the barrels is often used for encounters, social encounters, and the like. And when he wants to convey tension, he kind of uses this row shot, and it's really interesting because this creates the impression of being very crowded. Because even there, you see her, there's a lot of space in between these barrels, but what she's doing is she's sort of pushing herself up against them to kind of slide along. And it creates the impression of being very crowded, but it's also utterly unpopulated. There's something even almost apocalyptic about it. Like there's this sort of just monumental presence that she's contending with. And anyway, these shots are used to convey moments of tension. This is setting up a future tragedy. And also different angles on them, kind of like showing them more head-on, where the balance and the roundness of the open mouths is the dominant shot. This is used to sort of convey characters in repose, in thought and reflection, as she is here. She's no longer going to meet somebody, she's thinking about the interaction. So we have more of a rounder, sort of gentler visual kind of field of view. And also here as well, this would be her father walking among them. This is the rear side of the barrels. And again, a shot head on, where sort of calmed by the circles that are sort of the dominant, the dominant shape. And yeah, so just kind of using a lot of potential there. This is a really cool shot. This is really neat. This is a children's game that's being played, and Ito does something fascinating with this that I just absolutely love. So the children's game is the main action. It's the thing that's moving around, but you see they only take the upper left-hand corner of the screen, and even that, they're kind of clipped out of it a little bit. In the upper right, there's the sake barrel, and it's framed on the right with that staff. So it just leaves the ground there as the main view. And what's fascinating about this, what I love about this, is it's tempting to think that because there are no objects there, that the ground is somehow empty space. But the way the shadows are played along the ground from the kids, there's this sort of like zebra striping that's going on there. And when you kind of take a second and look at it, it's not that it's unpopulated. It's actually doing as much work visually and dynamically and kinetically as everything else in the shot. It's just given a sort of visual prominence, because the thing about negative space is it has to be kind of big, right, for it to have a kind of impression and for you to know it as negative space. And that's what this does. This does negative space just beautifully. What is empty is doing as much work as what is filled, and that's awesome. Oh yeah, and this is also cool, like a silent film technique. A lot of times these sort of placards are given their own. Oh, hello, cat. These cards are given their own placards, right? And to kind of convey and maintain the dynamism of this, rather than give it its own card, he actually superimposes it on top of the film, which he does very rarely, and it's a very deliberate technique. I think that's really cool to maintain the speed of how you're imagining these words going. And hold on a second, I gotta get this cat. Yo, go on, kiddo. All right. And yeah, and one last thing on these barrels here, something else that he does, which is really cool for a scene transition. So just to kind of set up what's happening here, the kids are playing their game. Chuji, who is our hero, who is on the right there, is approached by a child who is not playing. The child complains that the other kids won't let him play because he gets his left and right mixed up. And so Chuji decides to help him by buying treats for him, which he will then give to his friends and then enter their good graces, and he'll have another chance to play. So that's what's happening here, but the way that the scene ends is really cool. It cuts away from him and cuts to the barrel. Again, like the shadows are just doing a lot of work here. And if you look at the balance of the curves in the grain of the wood and the perspective and the shadows in the scene, it's all very balanced, and it cuts away from them. So you see him lifting the child up in silhouette and pointing, and it's almost as if like it's as if like the way this scene is structured is specifically just to be very attractive and to be very compelling, and I like that a lot. It's very interesting that the dynamic moment is not seen directly by the viewer but implied by the shadows that are there, and I think that's cool. It actually winds up doing a lot more work that way. And the last thing to look at here, so this is a really neat use of cuts to convey emotion and time. This is, just for context on the scene here, this is kind of a classic Shakespearean moment. She is in love with Chuji. A letter appears addressed to him from somebody implying that he is in love with a courtesan, and her heart is broken, and she's sort of dealing with a sense of betrayal and feeling foolish that she entrusted her heart to somebody who's, you know, with another. And so that's kind of the setup. So here she is looking at the letter, and she tears it up, and this is all one unbroken shot. Then it fades and cuts to the letter having been burnt, so we don't actually see her doing anything. It's just the effects, the sort of timestamps of the experience, in a sense. And so we see the letter then having been burnt, and then there's this long held shot of her face as she is kind of reflecting. She's kind of looking at the letter and then looking up, so she's moving on from realizing the situation to action. And then, as it goes to the end, it cuts really quickly to this, just a completely different facial expression. And this happens for like maybe a quarter of a second. It's very subtle. And then it goes here to her sitting there. She has been sitting there all evening. It is now night. So just over the course of about 5 to 10 seconds, let's see, I gotta go back here. Over the course of 5 to 10 seconds, we see her going from realizing this, which happens maybe early evening, afternoon, to the high points of the experience, two very different states and a very brief moment of shock and regret, and then the very end where she is sort of still captivated by the loss. And so much time has passed, so you know exactly what her night was like emotionally, and it does all this with a few shots, and they're just sort of structured so well. And it's beautiful. I love it. So yeah, with that, then we can move on to Dead Space Part 4.